All right, good afternoon, everyone. This is Vilas Patel. So let me get started. So Buzzword to the reality, that's our topic today. So let me introduce my panel. So Teresa, CEO and the founder of analyst firm voke. In 1999, that's about 17 years ago, she had published an article on need to tear down the silos between dev, Q, and operations. That's about 17 years ago, and perhaps all of you know that the DevOps as a keyword probably came up in 2011. So this is about 17 years ago that she had started with. And ever since she had published a lot of work on this topic. And then her recent research is state of release management. And she's going to share some of the insights from us at a large regulated organizations and the challenges at an industry level for that. And then we have Ronald Naik and Jitin Rabantia from Cognizant, both DevOps principal architects. They are currently working on healthcare, banks, and insurance company DevOps adoptions. So they'll share some of their specific experiences from their engagements. And I'm Vilas Patel. I run the DevOps practice at Cognizant for last about 3 years. 10 to 12 years before that, I was involved in product development with a lot of e-commerce companies like eBay, PayPal, Amazon, and so on and so forth. So as a part of that responsibility, we also build and release platforms, and that is kind of a not sexy name of DevOps, before the DevOps came up. So that's kind of thing. So let me just kind of quickly do a survey here. So show off your hands. How many of you belong to large regulated companies or interested in large regulated company DevOps? Just show off your hands. Oh, I see. More than half of you, right? That's great. So this talk is not for you if you are from one of those unicorn companies that I talked about, like eBay and PayPal, Amazon and Google and so on, right? If you are from one of those, then this is not really for you. If you already figured out how to scale DevOps up, then this is actually not for you. But if you are interested, or if you're wondering about how other companies like you are trying to figure out the challenges around DevOps in companies like you in large regulated environment, then you are in the right place. That's what we are going to talk about, right? So this large regulated environment, they work a little bit differently, isn't it? I mean, there are many people, there are organizations, there are SLAs, then we are talking about some regulations, there are some internal regulations, external regulations, compliances, and so on and so forth. That's the kind of a top ecosystem that we are talking about. Now, while that is going on in reality, you have been told to, there is a need to get releases done faster, right? Let's go move faster. Let's get agile. Let's deploy quicker, and so on. Then examples like Netflix, Amazon, Google, they are cited every now and then on you. I think this is kind of the, excuse me? Okay. So Netflix, Google, Amazon, these are the kind of examples that are given to you, saying that, hey, these are doing DevOps. DevOps has its own echo chamber that we all talk about, releasing faster and so on and so forth. So all of that is kind of growing on you. And some of you may be just curious about DevOps, what it is DevOps, what DevOps is all about. Then some of you may be just wanting to learn the technology. And so how do you go about it? How do you go about it in that reality environment and that kind of pressure and that kind of peer requests and demands that are coming out to you? What do you do? In those cases, we start a pilot, right? That's what you do. We just start a pilot. Let me. All right. Now you're doing the right thing, right? We all have been there. We started our pilots. Even the pilot is showing some signs of success, right? The pipeline sort of works. The Jenkins build job is sort of spitting out some of the builds even. You managed to get maybe 4 or 5 branches kind of merge into each other. Your merging strategy sort of working out. So pilots seem to be sort of working. The technology behind the pilot seem to be working, right? Now, what's the next question then? Now you may be thinking that, at least we thought it in the beginning that way, that now that we got this technology working, we just have to replicate this, maybe rest of the applications, and we got our DevOps adoption done in the organization, right? That's what the thought process is. But then that's not how it turns out to be. Now there are some new things that begin to come up then when you are starting to go to the next level, the next cycle of it. So the rolling out DevOps is not really equivalent of your pilot. Everybody around you while you're doing pilot actually gets DevOps, right? That's the feeling that you get. They get DevOps, they understand what DevOps is, what are the components of it, and so on and so forth. Still, there is a little bit of a problem, little bit of questions that are kind of open. Now you're beginning to think about it. And your realization start to grow on you that the pilot that you had is not same as what your enterprise rollout is going to look like. That's not a good feeling. I mean, we have been there multiple times, we confess, and that's not really a good feeling. And then the other questions start to pop out. Now, do I release faster? Do I care about the quality? Is there a choice between releasing faster and quality? Is there or in between that, or is there and in between that? There are a bunch of questions around that. How do I measure the ROI? Your CIO or whoever, maybe asking business justification for things. Now, how do I build the ROI? How do I measure the effort? How do I measure the delays and so on and so forth? How do I build that business case around that? That's not to. These are the kind of questions you did not face in pilot. You're still wondering about the Jenkins of the world and Nexus of the world and tools and so on and so forth, right? So these are the kind of questions that keep coming. Then the separation of duties that we talk about. Now, separation of duties do require you to have certain people doing certain things, and it's not about your pipeline kind of going boom, boom, boom and putting your deployments right in the servers, right? That's not about that. You need to think about separation of duties in a holistic manner and so on. So these kind of questions start to come in. Now, let's step back, right? How do you deal with these questions, and how do you deal with the approach as you move forward and as you go into the enterprise dev? So let me share some of the point of views that we actually built over the years. Now, when you are building your pilot, if you can define your approach in 3 little words, then you have a much better chance, relatively much better chance actually of succeeding. So what is that? So first of all, your DevOps approach had to be inclusive. You have Java, you have .NET, you have multiple technology stacks and so on and so forth. So can your DevOps approach address many of those stacks, right? You may even have a mainframe sitting out there, and 4 years ago, if your management said, we'll get rid of mainframe perhaps in 18 months or something like that, right? But it never went away. It is still out there. You may have SFDC, you have SAP, you may have COTS product, you have all of that kind of technology stacks that are going on. How do you actually take that technology diversity and then apply your DevOps principles, DevOps approaches to that? So your approach had to be inclusive. That's one. That's very important. Second is, you might want to drive the standardization that comes in the platform, and at the same time you have to drive the specialization, because truth be told, one platform, one tool, even a collection of the tool is not going to be sufficient for all this technology diversity that we are going to talk about. So your approach had to be a little bit flexible. You may have to define the blueprint, but it had to actually go out and be flexibly applied to each of these technology stacks. So that's very important. So if you can define your approach being flexible, that's great. The third is your approach integrated? You have QA, you have release management, you have operations, you have so many other folks going on. So how do you kind of address all of that together? Is your approach integrated? Is that addressing all these questions from all these departments? That's very important. Now, okay, that makes sense, but then how do you go about it? How do you create integrated, flexible type of an approach? So let me just give you a couple of insights into this. There are certain building blocks that we think at Cognizant that are important. If you cover all those building blocks in your approach, you are in a much better shape. So what is that? The first is the right pilot. You need to choose right pilot. It's kind of a Goldilocks type of situation. It cannot be too small, it cannot be too big. It had to actually address some of those technologies and so on. So paying attention to choosing your right pilot is very important. Second is the technology components of your DevOps approach. Well, first and foremost is the CI pipeline that you want to build. That's the Jenkins, that's the Nexus and so on. That's very important. The second is the smarter environment. I'm talking about the entire life cycle of the environments here, right from booking to the decommissioning and so on. Can you get your test data management smarter? Can you get your configuration automation going on a little bit in a smarter way? All of that collectively is what we call smarter environment. Very important. And by the way, the environment part is very difficult as well to go after. A lot of people that we work with sort of defer that because of the complexity that are involved in that. But it's very important. The next one is the release management that we talk. Can your release be automated? Can it actually provide the insights and visibility to the entire organization? Very important part of that. Now, all of this is like blind if the analytics is not going on. If you're not providing your dashboards in a real time, and let me stress, real time to your entire organizations, very important. And the sixth piece is, you have heard about the Docker going on, you have heard of the Cloud Foundry and so on, all of these going on. How do you deal with that? Right? We recently met customer last week. Their entire DevOps approach, the initial pilot approach started with Docker. Now, when we asked the question to the executive management that fine, if you go with the Docker, how many applications percentage-wise actually will lend itself to your Docker way of doing things? And the answer was, after about 10 minutes of conversation, about less than 1%. That doesn't sound like a right pilot to me, right? How about remaining 99%? And last but not the least, the platform skills that we talk about. There are a lot of tools, a lot of newer technology that will come in, even some of the existing technology that will have to be changed as a part of this DevOps initiative. So skills and the platform is very, very important to that. So let me bring in our panel with that. Let me bring in Teresa. Teresa will give us the industry perspective about how the rest of the industry is actually dealing with some of the challenges with the large regulated environment. Teresa.
Thanks, Vilas, and thanks everybody for coming to the presentation today. So, as Vilas was talking about some of the things that you're going to do as a large regulated type of company that has to deal with compliance, regulation, and so on, I have some technologies that I want to talk about that will really help you with the smart environment component that Vilas talked about. So what I want to talk about first is a little bit about changing your perspective. How do you have to look at things differently? And then how do you protect your brand and your business? Ultimately, that is what you really have to focus on, is protecting your brand and your business. You have to make sure that whatever you're putting out there, whatever you're releasing to your customers, is really going to delight your customers, not confuse your customers or not make your customers want to leave. And then finally, summarize. So let's start just talking a little bit about changing your perspective. So how many of you are over the age of 16? Okay, how many of you drive on a regular basis in the United States of America? Okay, so what color is a stop sign? Anybody have a, just shout out the color of a stop. Red, okay, great, stop sign's red. What shape is a stop sign? It's an octagon. Okay, what color is a yield sign? Yellow. Okay, what shape is a yield sign? Triangle. Okay. In 1968, the US Department of Transportation changed the yield sign from yellow to red. And that's okay that people in here said yellow. Everybody says yellow. You can take this question home, ask it to your friends, your family, your coworkers, everybody's going to say yellow. And the reason is people just have to change their perspective about how they're thinking about things. So you, as large regulated companies that have to deal with compliance, people always talk about, well, you know, everybody can do everything. The developer can do the testing and the tester can do the development. In a regulated environment such that you work in, you have a little thing called Sarbanes-Oxley that you have to deal with. So you have to make sure that you have separation of duties. However, you do have to collaborate more. That's one of the things we really have to work on, is tearing down those silos, tearing down those walls, and be able to communicate and collaborate better. You have to deal with compliance, you have to ensure compliance, and you have to follow your processes. There's no one process that fits everybody. There's no one size fits all in being able to put out good, reliable software. So as an analyst, I have access to a lot of data. We do a lot of research. And this comes from research that we just published in October, so last month, on the area of release management. And we asked people, how quickly are you releasing software to production? And what we see from this slide is that people are releasing faster. But what we don't know is, why are they releasing faster? Are they releasing faster because of a business need, or are they releasing faster because they put out poor quality of software and they have to go back and fix it? So whatever reason you're releasing, you have to make sure you're releasing fast and you're releasing right if you're releasing fast. What we also found out from this same research that we just published in October last month is that for the first time, customers are telling us that they really value quality over release. This is the first time. We've been doing this type of research for about 10 years now. And this is the first time that people have told us that they value quality over release. And it's only by 2 percentage points, so you know it's close, it's still within the margin of error, but people are valuing quality over release, which is great. What they also told us is their costs are out of control. So people say, you know, cost is not their number one priority, quality is their number one priority, but their software costs are rising. So ultimately, like I said, protecting your brand and your business, that is not negotiable. That's what you have to do. You can't just put out software and expect your customers to accept it if it's poor quality, or if it doesn't perform, or if it leaves security holes open, or if it doesn't fit within your compliance. So you want to protect your brand and your business. That's non-negotiable. So let's talk about some of the problems that people have. There's a lack of environments, a lack of access to services and components across the life cycle, and a lack of test data that is secure, that is also able to be used to give you data as close to production as possible. So you want to have an environment or a lab as close to production as possible. You want to have those services and components when you need them for as long as you need them, and you want to have that test data that is as close to production as possible, so you can then go ahead and have all of your teams keep pace with one another and collaborate with one another while you're still adhering to compliance, while you're still dealing with your regulation. So how many of you have ever heard the phrase from your developers, "It works on my machine"? Okay, everybody's heard that, right? How do you get around that? You know, Vilas talked about having smart environments. If you have environments as close to production as possible for your developers and testers, you're going to get rid of that phrase, "It works on my machine." And this comes from our research that we did on virtual and cloud-based labs. We know that on average, people have to wait 18 days to get into a physical lab. We know once they get into that lab, they only have 14 days in that lab, and it costs them on average $12 million per year per lab. So that's a very expensive proposition. So if you're using something like a virtual and cloud-based lab solution to deliver that smart environment that Vilas talked about, you get on-demand access to your labs. Your developers and testers are working in an environment as close to production as possible, and you pay as you grow, and there are no time restrictions. You get incredible return on investment with virtual and cloud-based labs. The next thing, part of a smart environment, service virtualization. Meaning you want to have access to all the components, databases, architectures, mobile platforms, and so on that you need to put your application out on, that you need to test on. We know that people wait a long time to get access to what they need. Our survey says that 84% of organizations say that their QA is delayed while they're waiting for access to components and services and so on, and 81% say that their development work is delayed. So people wait. We also know that the wait time to access the required systems is on average 32 days. That's a long wait time. So if you're using something like service virtualization, you allow your developers and your testers to keep pace with one another, so they always have access to what they need when they need it for as long as they need it. The final thing I want to talk about is test data. As part of that smart environment, you want to be able to test with data as close to production as possible, but it has to be secure, it has to be compliant, and it also has to be small enough that you can send it around and test it with different organizations in your development and your testing structure. So that data as close to production as possible is really critical. You don't want to have the conversation with a DBA that says, well, you know, hey DBA, just give me some data and when I'm done I'll destroy it, and then you have some sort of security breach, or you have some sort of violation of confidentiality of your customer data. 86% of the people who took our survey earlier this year told us that the lack of production-like test data causes project delays, cost overruns, and security issues. So as regulated companies that have to deal with compliance, this is the type of thing that you want to have inside your smart environment. So what did I just talk about? You want to change your perspective, think of things differently, collaborate within your organization, adhere to compliance, and use your own processes. You really want to break down those walls between development, QA, operations, and the line of business to deliver. And you really want to just focus on protecting your brand and your business. Ultimately, that's what you want to do. So I think Vilas has a couple of questions for JB and Ron up here as well.
Sure, that's very helpful actually. So if you need certain data, hopefully this kind of data will give you some baseline to make that business case that you are talking about, and then get that kind of required budget going on. So that was the idea behind this. So hopefully we have some insights with that. So let me start with JB. Now JB is a DevOps principal architect at Cognizant. He is currently working with a large healthcare company which fits the definition of the large regulated environment. I think in terms of regulation, beyond healthcare, I don't know anything else is actually regulated even heavier than that. So that's kind of a poster child of it. Before that, he had worked in product development for one of the unicorn company that we talk about, which is very famous on their DevOps journey. So let me ask JB this, that what challenges did you face when you were applying the DevOps principles to this journey at your healthcare company? What challenges did you face to launch your DevOps journey there?
Yeah, sure, Vilas. So the healthcare company which Vilas mentioned, it's a large Bay Area-based organization we've been working at. It's been serving its members since around Great Depression, so very old regulated industry or company as you would expect. What was working for us was the fact that the top management had a very progressive vision. So essentially we had a top-down approach wherein we said, let's look at how can we do better than what we are doing right now. As we got in, what I saw was we had a similar challenges as you would expect, like siloed organizations, manual, error-prone release, a lot of kind of issues as things got to production. But there were three key things which we noticed, which were kind of different than what you would expect in, say, other industries. The first one was a very traditional mindset. When we walked in, the QA organization would just not believe us that I could get the regression done in a couple of minutes and it doesn't take us a couple of weeks to get it done. Secondly, they had a very spaghetti technology landscape, which means to get one change done. So a very simple example, right? So if you look at the find doctor location application, you would expect that would be a pretty straightforward. But we had to go through 14 different interdependent systems to get the data to just be able to show the doctor locations as such. So that's how convoluted the landscape had become. And third was again based on what you've seen in the regulated industry and the apprehension that is it secure? So whatever I'm pushing, if I do any kind of automation, is that secure enough for me to be able to push it through? So those were the kind of issues we came across. And when we measured the impact of these inefficiencies, we found out that they were operating at about 60% inefficiency, which means like if there's one person working 40 hours a week, he would be only producing 24 hours worth of work. So that's what we are dealing with.
Fascinating, JB. I'll come back to you with respect to how did you tackle these challenges. I'll come back to you that. But let me actually move to Ran. Now, Ran, you are working with a interesting set of companies, insurance and bank. Now, these two sound similar, but there are some nuances that he had actually learned. So some part of his hair actually is because of that part of the challenge, I would say. So now you, Ran, emphasize on the feedback amplification specifically. I mean, you do have some of the challenges that JB talked about in the healthcare and in the bank and insurance, but you specifically focused on the feedback amplification part of it. So can you throw some light on it? What kind of challenges you saw and why are you focusing more on the feedback amplification part?
Sure, thanks Vilas. So primarily on the feedback amplification, we decided to actually chase what metrics we were to target. This organization had 50 metrics that they were putting it up, all in dashboards. Now there is an overkill with metrics also, so you have to be careful. You want to choose the right metrics, quote unquote, follow the money. Now, business metrics, IT metrics, you need to choose those right ones to actually look at it. Now, for that, you need that feedback amplification. I worked, and this customer had a multi-vendor environment. I had 6 vendors to work with. You had to get that collaboration done. So there were challenges in getting that done and getting that organized too. But in terms of how do you create these insights, JB spoke about dependencies between these groups, dependencies between the components. Now, I have to work across these vendors to make that happen too. Now, how do you look at the contracts? The contracts were not structured for them. They were more from a waterfallish kind of a mode. So we had to actually go back, work with the vendor management, get everyone together in one single pane of glass so that we work towards a common goal. That was the first part of it. The other one was purely in terms of which metrics give me the biggest insight that I can predict the quality of my release and I can predict the release that's going to happen. So we turned down a lot of these 50 metrics into, okay, which metrics are really important for business to ensure that, yes, after all, the money and the funding comes from them. So we had to actually literally look at those metrics which are literally valuable. From a team perspective, there is a perception issue, so we need to look at, from a developer standpoint, team standpoint, okay, what metrics are encouraging him to actually do these things? Because, hey, it works perfectly for me. Why should I fix it? I haven't had any defects. But how do you take it from 2-week release cycles to even a shorter week release cycles? I've had it from 6 weeks. They were doing 6-week release cycles. We brought it down to 2 weeks. Now, it's all about how you get this entire ecosystem, people, process, and tools. And people were key in our case. How do you get them involved? How do you get their mindset involved into this?
So JB, going back to your challenges, can you hit maybe 2 or 3 solutions that you implemented or implementing as a part of this roadmap at that healthcare company that you spoke of?
Yeah, certainly. The first very big hurdle that we really wanted to pass was like get a shared vision, right? So what is it that we are trying to achieve? How the vision was, how do we accelerate delivery, reduce the friction, and be able to bring down the silos? So that's the shared vision we shared. We had everybody go by. Then we took a very pragmatic and a very thoughtful approach of addressing the cultural, the pipeline, and the product aspect. So those were the 3 pillars of the solution that we put together, where we made sure that we are addressing the people issues, cultural transformation, where we took a very blank sheet approach, where we said, let's set up a parallel universe, make sure that we have this ideal state figured out, and then kind of get that operationalized before we onboard other people to start using this kind of a DevOps mindset. Secondly, on the overall delivery pipeline, we kind of, again, build it afresh. But with that, what we were able to do is showcase how we are able to address the issues I talked about, right? So security. We have complete audit trail in the whole tool chain, wherein you don't have to have a person go and validate for a week that this environment which is up and running is actually as per the compliance and security guidelines. We kind of are able to showcase that using our tools, automation, and stuff. So that kind of addressed the security issue. So Teresa talked a lot about the virtualization, service virtualization, and test data management. So that came in handy for us to be able to bring down the spaghetti, the code and the application dependencies that we had. So that's how we kind of solved the second challenge as that we had. So that's how we went about the overall solution as such.
Okay, sure. So I'll have one more question for Ron, and if you have any question, just come up to this mic and then feel free to ask us. We probably have a couple of minutes to take the questions. So Ron, back to you. There's a lot of cultural aspect to this. There is a lot of people element to this. So how did you build your roadmap? How did you build your approach and the strategy to kind of deal with that cultural aspect of it? What is that one recommendation that you can provide to the folks here?
So in one sentence or in 3 words, this is what I learned, and this is what I'd like to share with all of you. Socialize, socialize, and socialize. That is the only thing that actually worked for us. It's about people, it's about getting them involved, and how early you can get them involved is the key to success. Now, a lot of socialization needs to be built in and baked into our roadmap and plans. Typically, the DevOps roadmap plans are very tech-focused, very tool-focused, or very process-focused. You just need to have a conference session, or we'll build this platform and then we'll have a demo session like this. Hey, this works fine. Their definition of done is this socializing aspect that you have to handhold them every step of the way. It is needed. We are seeing that. So socialize, socialize, and socialize.
Right. Any other questions from you? Or else I have one more question for Teresa. So Teresa, when you look at, now you have an industry perspective, you talk to thousands of people in this large regulated environment. Is there a certain trend that is emerging as to how people, what's the length of this adoption? That I know the answer perhaps is forever, but apart from that, what's the time period that people should be looking at? Is it 18 months, 12 months, 6 months? What is that you're observing?
Yeah, every company is different, and I think that some of our research that we just did around release management shows that there's not a whole lot of automation. So the first thing is we have to do automation. We also learned from our most recent research is that, surprise, surprise, developers still do not like to do unit testing. So we have to start at the beginning. We hear so much about shifting left. We have to have developers doing unit testing. There's not a whole lot of use of things such as release management to really understand the characteristics of what is happening throughout the lifecycle inside your entire pipeline. So just starting with smaller projects and making sure that you can have this collaboration and communication in your organization and use the most recent technology to deliver these strong and valuable return on investment. Utilize professional services such as teams from Cognizant and so on to help you really get to that next level. So it's about changing your mindset, changing your perspective, changing the way you've done a little bit of work in the past, where you want to have visibility and transparency across the teams and across the organization. So you understand what's going into production, why it's going into production. Is the business pushing you to do something, or are you doing it because the last release was so bad you have to go back in and bug fix? So I think the answer to the duration is it varies, but take small steps, make sure you're successful, and if you work inside of a regulated environment, you have to really take into consideration all of the requirements that you have by your governing body, making sure that you're dealing with compliance, making sure that you're following the correct processes and so on. So that's, that's why I say everybody's just different in how they adapt.
So thanks Teresa. So thank you all. So I know this is a lot of data that we talked about. Teresa's slides had a lot of data. So if you want some insights into that, or if you want us to share some of that specific thing, just get hold of us. Our booth is right there. And thank you for coming.
And I'll be at the Cognizant booth as well. So if you want to talk to me about some of the data we have, some of what we learned from our release management research, our service virtualization research, and so on, I'll be at the Cognizant booth for the next couple of hours.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.